we will now be recording this meeting. Without further ado, each speaker will introduce him or herself shortly, and we will begin our open discussion. We'll start with you, Dr. Erantov.
So hi, everybody. It's great being here, wherever here is. So I'm going to share my slides. Gives me that awkward couple of seconds to do that. Okay. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
I hope it's there. I'm excited to talk about the last year of COVID, the technology which I call here Corona Tech, that accompanied us in the last year, and really try to reflect on what's been happening. COVID feels to be on the way out in some countries, in the UK and in Israel. So we have the privilege of looking at retrospect, but of course we need to acknowledge that all over the world, COVID is a huge crisis. And I'm sure that maybe for some people watching this and kind of looking at a summary, this will feel a little strange. But I want to acknowledge that first of all. Just a little bit about who I am. So again, my name is Eran Toch. I'm the head of the iWit lab in Tel Aviv University that's interacting with technology. And with my great students, we see a couple of them here, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about a project with Oshat Ayalon. She was a PhD candidate in my lab, and now she's a postdoc at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And our lab is working on the intersection between mobile technology on the one hand and security and privacy. So we work on several aspects. We work on understanding how people use mobile technology, how they manage the security and privacy. And we work also on solutions, some technological solutions like using privacy-preserving technologies or synthetic data, and some solutions that are in the intersection between people and technology, things like human-computer interaction. Okay, so it's been a long year. It's been a really weird year and a tough year. And it was a year where technologies have changed a lot, and things that seemed like science fiction and seems very far-fetched were moving extremely fast from Orwellian dystopias to things that actually govern our daily life. And all of us, all over the world, needed to comprehend and to process this kind of technological change and the behavioral and governmental changes that came with it. So just a couple of examples of the technologies that were part of combating COVID-19. These included things like quarantine enforcement, things like electronic bracelets that make sure that you stay in quarantine. So the first they were deployed in places like Hong Kong and Taiwan. But then, for example, they came to Israel, and at the end, Israel didn't use them. But it looked surreal at first. But at the end, the Israeli government had almost used them. They would have used them if the vaccines were not as effective. We've seen technologies that restrict movement, that prevent people from going on public transport if they come from a COVID-related place. And more recently, with the vaccines, we've seen technologies that allow only vaccinated people to enter certain areas. So in Israel, we had the name the government gave it, green passes, green passports, and that allowed only vaccinated people to go into, for example, restaurants using a mobile app or using some printed card. And similar technologies were used in the US and in other places in the world. And I'm going to focus mainly on contact tracing, which is something that we've seen a lot, and I think it's a very relevant and it's a sort of technology or sort of template for technology that I think we're going to see more in the future. So contact tracing technologies are I'm sorry. It's okay. Contact tracing technologies. I'm going to speak to them about in seconds, but basically, of course, they help to trace people who were in close proximity with people who were sick with COVID, and then help quarantine them. So, given this year, given the technologies we had, and in a little bit of retrospect, we can start to ask ourselves, first of all, like, what did we learn? Did it work? What did it do to the interface between people and technology? What did it do to the interaction between governments and people? Also, what can we learn about it from the future? Do we see that certain technologies are better at combating crisis? How to design those things? And I think we all learned a very important lesson about the role of people in interacting with technology. When we design data-rich applications, when we design smart cities, we kind of assume that the government is somebody's going to use the data, and then things will improve. But apparently, people are a very, very important part in this kind of chain. And this year had helped us maybe crystallize a little bit what's the role of people here. So just a little bit about what can we learn about COVID-related technologies more generally. So they're a very interesting template for urban technology in general. First of all, they extend the physical environment with some digital invisible layer. So, imagine that we have the city, and we can go to certain places in the city, and we can't go to certain other places. With green passports, for example, we can go into a restaurant or we can go into a mall, and without them, we can't. So rearrange the physical environment in new and weird ways. They change the idea of time and place. So one of the interesting things with COVID is that all the interesting things happened 2 weeks ago. We could have met somebody with COVID, 5 days ago, and now we get the message from the government that we need to quarantine ourselves, so we need to look back. So they changed the way we think about time, because where we were, what did we do, who did we see is recorded, and it can affect our present. It reorganizes the physical environment. We look differently at places. We look differently at crowded places. I don't know. For me, when I recently went to a rock concert in Israel, and just seeing all the people around me was so weird, because in the past I would think, what are the chances that will catch COVID, or my app will ask to quarantine me because of it, and it changes the way big companies like Google and Apple interact with the government. I'm going to talk a little bit about it soon. So contact tracing technologies basically find people with higher risk than others to have COVID or some other disease, and then mitigate it some way, like quarantine them. In the last COVID pandemic, those processes, those contact tracing processes that were manual in the past have become digital on a very large scale. We can now start to think about how effective they were. A recent study done with data in the UK and published in Nature, actually in the end of May, had shown that, at least in the UK, these technologies seem to be effective. They quarantine people that wouldn't been quarantined otherwise. It's still, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of academic work on how effective they were, but at least in this study, it seems that every percentage point increase in app users. I mean, that means people downloading the app had reduced the number of cases by 2.3%, which isn't nothing, which is actually seemed to be quite effective. But I'm sure that depends on many, many variables. And they were deployed in many places around the world. First one in Singapore. Israel had deployed one in the end of March last year, and then the UK and many other countries around the world, but not all of them. For example, in the US, in many states, did not deploy this kind of technology. And those technologies can be either centralized and very problematic when it comes to privacy. So places like Israel, South Korea, and Taiwan have deployed those kind of centralized technologies. They can also be in the middle, so they can allow some level of anonymity with some level of control of the government. And in most places around the world, including Israel, again, Israel have deployed two technologies. The UK had relied on protocols for a very high level of privacy protection and voluntary use. One of the interesting dynamics that we've seen in this pandemic is between governments. So some governments have tried to deploy centralized solution that will allow them also to gather data and understand where people catch COVID and to mitigate it in some way. But Google and Apple had pushed back and stopped certain technologies like Bluetooth to be available to those apps and allowed only very privacy-preserving protocols to be carried out. I think I'm kind of spending too much of my time, so I'm not going to talk in depth about certain things. So we've done, for example, a study in Israel trying to understand what are the factors that contribute to people downloading contact tracing applications. And we've seen that privacy concerns, for example, are pretty powerful in predicting who will download this application or not. So people who can believe, have trust in the system would be 20% more probable to download the application. And the belief of how effective this technology also plays a very, very strong role. I'm not going to go into the Israeli case, but just skip right to the takeaway messages or the lessons I think we can learn from Corona tech to the future, and maybe we can expand on it in the discussion later on. So first of all, there's this tension between governments and platforms like Google and Apple. Basically, Google and Apple have the operating system for the urban environment. And if we want to deploy something meaningful, we need Google and Apple to get us in. I think we're going to see, so actually what we've seen in the last year is that governments have, I don't know, rolled on their back. So governments basically either adopted Google and Apple or didn't adopt any useful technology at all. I think we're going to see a pushback against that, and we're going to see governments understanding, because of this contact tracing technologies, that we need to gain more power in this kind of dynamics. We've seen that actually privacy-preserving technologies were much useful than other types of technologies because people trusted them more. So for me, as a person, as a researcher that cares a lot about privacy, I think it's actually a good sign. Trust is very important, and when solutions are deployed that don't build trust, they were significantly less effective. We've seen technologies that really change the urban environment, restrict it, change it, and we're going to see way more of these types of technologies in the future. So we're going to see technologies that help us navigate, that change the way we can use the urban environment, that change the urban environment. And I think this, contact tracing technologies and green passports are only the first example. We've seen very complex trade-offs between personal liberty, on the one hand, other people's rights. So for example, other people's rights to not get infected by you, and the government ability to control things. And this is very complex. I must say that I think all of those things are very important. At the end, I'm personally more confused about COVID than I was in the beginning, because we really see those very complex trade-offs. And that's not something that's going to change. We can't have something that takes personal liberty and forgets all about the other values or other solutions. And of course, collecting data is just the beginning. So we've seen that technologies that didn't encourage trust were not as effective, and without thinking about how to create trust, how to maintain it, how to allow meaningful control, COVID technology was really useless. So those are the lessons that at least I don't know, that kind of interest me after this weird year. I would love to thank you. You're welcome to, if you're interested in what I do, Twitter is a good place to kind of catch up. And that's about it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Toch. It was very interesting, and this crisis was really came with a lot of privacy issues, and we're glad that we're here to talk about it. Up next, we have Dr. Ronit Porian. You can share your slide. Ronit, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Nice meeting you all. Eran, I really liked your presentation, and we're going to have many joint shared research interests. My name is Ronit Purian. I teach in Tel Aviv University, and I'm also co-chairing CoData Smart Cities Task Group on how to apply data science and data tools to better understand our urban life and smart cities and urban informatics. So I've been asked to talk about smart cities industry, and it's very related to the government, as we could see from Eran's presentation. And another comment about the title of the London Festival of Architecture is that the word caring is really meaningful here, not only because of COVID, but also because of smart cities and e-government. I remember that Obama, if you can remember Obama, he used to say that e-government depends on people who care. And over the years, I could see it again and again, how important it is to find the special agent, the person that can make things happen. So only one slide about myself. This is a description of our key activities in CoData. We've submitted a proposal to the EU Horizon program, and I'll talk about that. And we have many other ongoing activities about the behavioral aspects and social aspects in smart cities, which is also something that we apparently share, how the smart city is not only digital or physical, but it includes so many aspects. So a few days before the Israeli lockdown, we had a conference, a workshop about integrating data platform. It was really very inspiring workshop and very productive, with some of the a report presented by Felix from Berlin, who showed a wide view of mobility and the ways that we can create business models, the partnerships between the public and the private sectors, which is, I think, the name of the game. The business models and the data models that are related to the business rationale of every startup or government agency. So I think that this is really an important starting point to discuss smart cities. Who owns the data? How do I feel as a user in terms of data ownership? And these are really crucial elements that we'll see again and again in our research. So here, Felix presented the broad definition of mobility as a service. Before COVID, we had this amazing world of Uberization. The industry ruled. We had really industry domination, okay? And I think that over time, over that year, we became much more aware of the importance of being more privacy preserving and considering other aspects, environmental and social. The environment also became here player. So if we look at the landscape of smart mobility before COVID, as you can see, we had so many robotaxis. And what I think is that robotaxis and all this autonomous vehicle vision is going to be a disaster, because we're going to have too much traffic on the roads, and it will eventually decrease the accessibility of all users to mobility services. And it's not going to be very environmental. So one of the research themes that I'm working on is a way to design flexible route planning that can make mobility much more accessible and caring for the environment. So in this term, the city is definitely part of the technological artifact, as Ran said also. And I think that even before the contact tracing application, we could feel it by, for example, by Uber, by personalized on-demand services that change the dynamic in our streets, the physical elements in our daily life. With this understanding, I wanted to emphasize two aspects. One is data. We have some kind of ontological reversal in the way to design data, and civic-mindedness. This is a nice way to say that we cannot be apolitical. We must be really political, engaged, and understand the systemic design of and problems of our life in the smart city. Okay, so I've started with all these concepts and research areas to design a concept to frame all the problems into a coherent research question. And I've been talking until now a little about mobility and the mobility data. The other part is about the behaviors of the users. And don't stop calling me resilient is really an important thing to say in this context. Resilience is something that I really want us to discuss later. And I'm afraid I'm short of time, right? So I'll stop here, or just say that along the lockdowns all over Europe, we could see more and more car-free zones, which was a really nice vision even before COVID, and COVID really helped understanding the importance of free car zones. We could see a huge rise in bicycle using in micro-mobility services all over the world. We could find open data for Canada, I think Vancouver, and we could see that there were much more bicycle using, more than just walking, and more than public transportation, of course. I have here some data just to show the relationship between mobility and the quarantine and trust in the government. You can see that in Berlin and London, the trend is relatively as you would expect. They declare a quarantine and people stop moving around. But the amazing thing is to see in Singapore that dropped down once they declare quarantine. People stop moving around. I think I'll stop here and we'll continue talking about this some more slides later during our panel discussion. The other things that I wanted to mention, and we'll talk about it later, is the spatial behavior of people and how it was changing over the last year.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Boyan. It's very interesting. I think we would all like to see a change in how mobility is perceived by the decision makers in every country. I think it affects people mostly disadvantaged, I assume. And I think here in Israel, where we're all from, and in London, I think it's very, very relevant. Now to the more sociological side, to the more social aspects, we will turn to Adas Tur. Adas.
Okay, hi, thank you. I will share my presentation and okay, just a moment. So what I would like to talk about is something based on research. Some of it is a long interdisciplinary project that we did about smart cities. Eran Toch was a part of it, and Professor Tali Khatuka and Professor Michael Birnhak. So I will talk, I'll use some of the conclusions from our research and other papers that I wrote with Professor Khatuka. One of them, the last one, called From Smart Cities to Smart Social Urbanism. So actually we suggest a shift from thinking about smart cities to thinking about smart social urbanism. So first I will try to explain what is smart social urbanism, and then I'll talk about COVID-19 in the aspect of community and care. And at the end, I will try to see what the crisis, what COVID-19 could teach us and strengthen our agenda of smart social urbanism. So if we talk about, why my slides? Okay, so if we talk about smart cities, you all know the myth of smart city, the buzzwords such as democratization, participation, efficiency, sustainability, smart governance. It will make us cities better and well connected. That is what we know about. Yeah, that is the promise of smart city. But when we think about the social questions that are rarely been asked, then we can ask for whom? Democratization, participation. Who profit from it? Which communities enjoy the smart city? Who is able to participate? Maybe it's not all the citizens of the city or the residents in the city. We have some residents which are not citizens. And also the question is participation meaningful? Or maybe it's just, like participation like in questionnaires or in very small projects, and not real meaningful participation of residents that can really bring their input, their insight, their needs. So part of the project was to look at the social questions and ask how does the digital change affect existing gaps between populations in cities, in different communities, at the national and the municipal level. So in our research, in our big research, I will talk about very concrete conclusions from our big research, which you can see here, the digital city, but also more important from papers that Professor Khatuka and I wrote, and it was published because it concentrated on the social aspects. So what we found is that smart cities does affect social digital gaps. It means that it enlarges gaps on a national scale and also on urban scale. So on national scale, we looked at 10 cities in Israel that are in the race of becoming smart. And we tried to see, are they all going in the same path? And of course, they're not, and they cannot do it in the same rhythm and with the same resources, because the cities are, of course, they have different economic situation, different human capital working in the municipalities. And it's something that also really concerns policymakers on the national level. The fact that it will increase gaps between cities that are stronger and cities that are, for example, in Arab communities or in Orthodox communities, or just in small cities and towns in Israel that cannot even do the small digitization shift that they need to do. So first, it can reinforce gaps that already exist between cities. And we also looked at it on an urban scale. We looked at the city of Tel Aviv, which is the most smart city in Israel and the strongest city in terms of economy. And we looked at 4 different neighborhoods with different social economic background, but also different ethnic background. And we did see that the southern neighborhoods, which are weaker, use less the apps and services of the digital city than the neighborhoods that are more wealthy and more high economically population. So that is first thing that is very, very important. Thinking about thinking about smart cities, it's something that we need to take under consideration and think how we tackle this challenge of increasing gaps. What we also found is that smart city initiatives that focus on social needs and address inequality in the digital age are still at the margins of technological initiatives. And I will explain it a little bit further. We talked about it, we wrote about it in our paper, Smart Social Urbanism, that was published in last year. So what we found is that the involvement of private sector, which we know that the private sector is one of the most strongest advocates for smart cities, and they recognize the municipal and the urban arena as a place where they can grow and as a new market. But so they are involved in the smart city projects in cities in a very, they have a very, very important engagement because they become part of, or even the leaders of making the strategic plan or the strategic vision of what is smart city. And because they are the one who's leading it, I think that, or what we saw is that they have a technological bias. And so they neglect social challenges, social gaps, welfare, care, and education, which because the technological companies, they have their own solutions. They deal with garbage, they deal with lighting, they deal with transportation and mobility. And the area of welfare, care, social gaps, and even education is not part of their, it's not what they do. So so what we found is that almost from the 10 cities that we looked at in Israel, almost none of the cities had a real social initiative, something that we can say that they relate the digitalization and smart city project to social challenges or welfare or others. And what they are doing, the one that we found that are doing some, it was really, really at the margins and not very developed. So cities don't think about these issues in relation, how they can use technology and digitization in order to deal with their challenges. So we suggested that the concept of smart social urbanism, which aims to shift the focus towards social and human capital to reduce social polarizations in cities. It offers guidelines for developing digital vision for cities and a framework based on 3 pillars: transparent decision-making, sensitivity to context, and social needs. So we believe that cities should take back the leadership and creating the vision of smart city, and it should be much more related and sensitive to context, because one of the things is that the technological companies, they have their solution, and it's not sensitive to the context. For example, the city in the periphery have different challenges and maybe need totally different thinking of smart city than cities in the center. And the technological solution doesn't have this sensitivity. And they also need to think much more about their social needs. And when I'm talking about social needs, it could also be, you know, like challenges of if work or in the work is something and employment is their challenge. So they need to think about smart city in relation to their specific challenge. Okay, so going from the what we suggested to COVID-19 and smart cities, I see COVID-19 as we witnessed it and experienced it as some kind of crisis of care. What we saw, or what the COVID exposed, is the weakness, but also our dependence on systems of care, such as health, education, welfare, mental support. And we saw, you can see here, it made us reappreciate the people who are most of the time, you know, like the nurses, the teachers, and people who are very, in regular time, they're in low in the hierarchy of what the neoliberal society appreciate, like the high tech or other, or financial. So it made us reappreciate our care systems, but also to see the weakness which happened after you know, neoliberal economy that reduced its and doesn't invest in its care system. We also, our social distance changed our concepts of closeness and distance. It reshaped our social ties and intensified the centrality of the domestic community. So all the fact that we needed to take care of the social distancing and the phases of closure and quarantine, it really changed our social ties. It made our domestic community more important. The people in my building who helped me with my kids because my grandma couldn't come, or the elderly woman in my building that I had to go to grocery for her. So it changed our community and social relations. It also accelerated processes of digitization, of course, in work, in social, all our social relations moved to a screen-based relationship. Our education, consumption, health, all been digitized very, very fast. Yet the transition to digital life and screen-based relationship reinforced the meaning and need for human encounters, social relations, and community life. So I think it was also because we are going to a future of much more digital life, and that a lot of our aspects of life are becoming digitized. I think it was good experience for many of us to reappreciate, you know, meeting, being together, the need for meeting in our physical life. So actually, it was a crisis of the communities. I mean, we really had to take care of the community in many, many ways. And what we saw is bottom-up initiatives, but also top-down initiatives. So bottom-up initiatives is initiatives that came from the community. We saw a lot of initiatives, I will show it in a bit. Communities using digital platforms to organize, to communicate, to help each other and encourage each other, with the aim to enhance solidarity, help people in need, help small businesses, improve the immediate environment, and care for one another. But we also, the municipalities had also to very, very fast shift and take care of their community in many, many aspects. Of course, in terms of pandemic control and monitoring centers. So they had to collect data and do epistemological investigations and share data with the public, guide the public. In terms of care and welfare, they had to take care of special populations such as homeless people, immigrants and refugees, elderly, people in economic difficulties, and to deal with digital gaps. For example, the kids who doesn't have a computer for schools or other services. And they also had to go very fast digitalization in schooling, in education, in public services, and communication with the public. What we saw is that the ability to organize, the ability of municipalities to organize quickly and act effectively was based on having up-to-date data, information on the various populations in the city, having supporting system in the community and civic society, having trust from the community, from the public, and collaboration and good infrastructure of digital communication. These were the municipalities who could act faster and better to deal with the COVID. So here are some community initiatives that are all bottom-up initiatives, and it could be something from local businesses fair, because a lot of people were really trying to help local businesses who were, of course, were under economic crisis. Food distribution for elderly, needy, and people in quarantine. There was a lot of initiatives from the community. Community gardens, direct consumption from farmers. And this is from my building, just the people hanging out, which just became, the building was our community, and we helped each other, and it was something that was formed, because community is not something that exists, it's something that needs to be formed, and it needs to have the right conditions to form. And the question is, I will get it in a minute, but so what are the lessons from COVID-19? What can we learn from COVID-19 for our smart social urbanism? So what we learned in the time of COVID is that care and social needs are essential for the resilience of cities and communities. And also that smart social urbanism is crucial in times of emergency as in times of routine, but actually we need to build it in time of routine so it would be able to thrive and work in times of emergency. So what can we take from it? I think the public sector should really learn from it the ability to respond and act in times of emergency is based on the infrastructure of welfare and care. Therefore, in order to be smart, cities should invest more in initiatives in the field of social resilience, care, and welfare system, using digital innovation to improve those services. What we didn't, as I said, we didn't see it until now, that cities are really thinking about how digital innovation can help in those areas. The community, thinking about the community, I think that communitarism, or like the sense of community, really thrive in times of crisis and emergency. That is when we are all, trying to help one another, and we feel solidarity, and we are urged to help one another. And the question is, does it last after? Should it last after? Because it's also a question. And what are the conditions and infrastructures that can help build the community in times of routine and in times of crisis? I think that we saw that people know best how to help their community, but they benefit from infrastructures, platforms, and resources provided to them by the authorities. So I don't think that policymakers and municipalities should take the role of the community, because I think it's important that people do things for people. But they should invest in supporting and creating this infrastructure and supporting the community in times of routine, to create collaborations, provide spaces for initiation, community centers, allowing local leadership to grow and to be able to cooperate in times of routine as in times of crisis. And the private sector, I think the question is, will the private sector will we see more private companies entering the social realm of care, public health, education, and social gaps? And is it desirable? Do you want private sector to be in this area? So this is just a thank you from Thanks for Carers that we saw in many cities around the world. We saw a lot of different kinds of ways to help the carers, which, as I said, we appreciated them much more in this time of COVID. And I hope that this would last, because in terms of society, I believe that this make our society better and our cities better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hadass. It's been really interesting to see how you personally were also involved in such projects and saw it firsthand. I think it really enhances the experience and what you're talking about. Now we will move to our part of open discussion. And I think, and you've said it well, Hadass, this year's theme of the festival is care. How we care for one another, how urban communities can help us facilitate that care. And I want to ask you, and feel free to talk amongst yourselves also, what does an urban community mean for you? Is it good? What role should it fulfill in our lives? And is there any place there for data, big data? Yes, you can all answer.
So first, I want to say that I didn't talk about the private sector, but we do see proliferation in using the term community. And every app and every company want to have to create community, and they have people who are responsible of making community. You know, there are like this kind of new jobs of community stuff, and I think, of course, we should be more critical and cynical towards it, because two things. I first think that community is something that succeed if it's really needed, if it answers people's needs. And we can also, we need to differentiate between different communities. For example, the Waze application, yeah, that we all use it. So they have community, but is it really community? Is it something that we use? Is it something that we care about? So I really want to differentiate between communities that are really something that is important to us, that we feel. What is a community? Is to feel some kind of belonging, to feel solidarity, to feel that you have something that is more that is wider than your family and friends, and something that you belong to and you feel part of it. And there are many, many ways to create it. And it could be, of course, it has different levels. My people from the building, we became a community. But I also feel sometimes part of the community of the city where I live. And it's very, very amorphic. It's only in Facebook, and it's because I really appreciate my mayor. And I'm proud at what he says. And when he says something that I'm proud of, I'm like, oh, I love my city and I'm proud to be part of it. So I feel some part of the community, but it's something very, very broad and very amorphic. So yeah, I think that when we're talking about urban communities, we need to think about it as a range of communities, and sometimes it's bottom up, and sometimes it's. But as I said, I believe that it's something that should be I see that the municipality, their main role is to create the infrastructure that enables the community to thrive. And it means it could be public gardens, it could be places to meet, public areas, and yeah.
Can I disagree? Okay, Adas, I really agree with you, but let's make it interesting. We don't have that great municipalities. We don't have enough knowledge, infrastructure, and it's not only a matter of budgets. Okay, it can be a really rich municipality, but it's complicated. You need people that know how to manage all this. As you said, you need to know how to form communities. It's a process. So let me present the industry in this context. I think that in the beginning of the first lockdown in Israel, many startups provided solutions that were really creative and innovative to protect privacy, from the beginning, taking a few steps back and not collecting data that can identify people, just to anonymize the detect people grouping somewhere. Okay, so the industry was much more responsive, and in this context, I think that was a bottom-up process. Okay, it was people like you and me. They just unfortunately work in the industry, and they were cautious enough to propose these new models. And from the other hand, as Eran mentioned before, Google and Apple provided a new architecture that allowed us to be much safer. And another argument against governments, local or central governments, is that all these local contact tracing applications were national based. I mean, if now I want to go to cross the border in Europe somewhere, or you need to create a whole new architecture of interoperable systems to start talking with each other. And that's why I wanted to mention that in the industry, the economic interests in the industry are at least transparent. We can understand what they want. They need to have the profit in addition to other values that they create, the social value, the environmental value, not only the financial value, okay? But they were many times much more responsible than governments and then municipalities. We could see that in the way that ministries, I'll not name names, but not only in Israel, did not protect our privacy. Okay, so I think it's not that easy to blame the industry and try to. We need to make so many changes in order to have that social democratic solution work. I believe in it. I think that solidarity and the community are the most important thing in this hierarchy of needs of us in cities. But I'm not sure that municipalities and governments are the answer.
Yeah, I think I'll try to be a little bit more positive. I'll kind of continue what Hadass and Ronit are building towards, and I agree very much that there's a range of needs and technologies. And when I look, I think one technology that we kind of missed in this last year is just information systems used by national health agencies like the NHS in the UK and the the medical providers in Israel. We have like 3 big ones, and we've seen that those databases were used quite a lot, and I think in a way that was more effective than some people think. In, for example, tracking older adults that live alone and contacting them. There were those health providers had contacted them using the phone and other ways, and provided care through teleconferencing and other means. And then those databases were extremely useful in the vaccination campaigns in both Israel and the UK. I think one of the reasons that vaccination campaign in both of those countries were very effective and reached a relatively high level of vaccination is because of this kind of tracking. So I'm putting privacy and some other issues aside for a second, and just acknowledging that on some level, first of all, you need data. You need to understand people in a data-rich way to coordinate, to create care on a large scale, and also acknowledging that there's this, and I really agree with Hadass here, that we have this kind of, from the family, building, neighborhood, municipality, but also, of course, country level and global level, this hierarchy or not hierarchy, but those levels of care. So data has a very important role, but naturally it has lots of complexities.
Yes, all right, and it's really interesting to me because Dr. Doch, you really an expert in privacy, in cyber privacy, and all the big data industry really relies heavily on massive gathering of all kinds of information, and sometimes to an unnecessary extent. But we've seen that countries which utilize effectively this method of really pulling together all their data sets and trying to uh, bring a tool out of them to combat this pandemic rapidly, sometimes have done better, I think. And I would like to know from all of you, do you think there is some justification of using such massive data collection in order to solve these crises that require rapid response? And what are some guidelines we can put so that in the next crisis we won't be caught unprepared again? Or is it just doomed to repeat itself?
I'll answer first because you direct the question to me. So first of all, I would maybe challenge the premise that more data was more useful in, for example, in COVID. Naturally, data is good, but we did see, I think, a crisis in data science, in creating meaningful knowledge from this data. I think when we look, for example, in the UK, the UK government is basically, I think, a very centralized one. It relies on lots of data collection. And at the beginning of the pandemic, the UK government that has all this data had just made a kind of a very, basic mistakes in how to interpret and model the data. So, and of course, many other countries had, I think, made different types of mistakes as well also. So we live really with, lots of data. Governments have access to mobility data and the data from all the PCR and everything. And I'm not sure, collecting this data is the real challenge here. It's more about making, science-based decisions, not over making them, and thinking about this sort of balance. And at the same time, we did see, again, I think UK and Israel are good examples, kind of crises in trust. People not trusting quarantine messages because they don't know how they were created. People not quarantining themselves from when they come from the airport. So, naturally, data is important. Naturally, there are ways to do that. Maybe I'll let Hadass and Runit kind of answer those more difficult questions. But at least for my analysis, I see a crisis of making decisions, making data-based decisions, and trusting those decisions is as the two most important challenges we face.
I want to say something that Eran always talk about about data and privacy as two trade-offs, right? But I started to think about the relation between data and care as also kind of trade-off, because when we feel that they're using the data not to take care but to control us, then, like we felt in the time of the closures in Israel, that it was based on political ambitions, some of it, and we felt that we are being restricted and our movement is being restricted, and that it was also we were afraid of the data of surveilling us and everything. So we looked at data and collection of data as something that is bad. But when the vaccination came to Israel, and we could do the vaccination generally very, very fast in Israel, and it was based on the fact that we all have a health system that is public. And now with the Green Pass, we all give our, we say yes to giving our, I think, medical information and something like, but it's for our care and for a benefit. So there is also this trade-off between the things. And I want to give another example, thinking about special populations. So for example, refugees and asylum seekers in Tel Aviv and homeless people in Tel Aviv, which is populations that I research in my research. And I looked very closely about what happened in the time of Corona. Of course, they are seen as dangerous populations because the homeless, of course, they sleep in the street, so they can transmit, and also the asylum seekers. Now, because Israel and Tel Aviv municipality are not, they don't have real data collection, because they don't give services to asylum seekers, okay? Because they are not, because of the political situation around, but the state of Israel doesn't assist, okay? They don't provide housing and healthcare and other things, so they don't have a lot of data. And they don't have addresses of where all the people live. And in this crisis, it was something that you could see that when you don't care and you don't treat those people during the year, then you also, it's very hard to deal with them in times of crisis, and then they become dangerous. But it's also a question, because for the asylum seekers, they have some, because they have some benefits from not being in the system, okay? Because then they're not surveilled properly by the police. So what I'm trying to say is that it's really complicated, and that, we can look at this trade-off also, not just from privacy, because care is also some kind of surveillance. Do you understand what I mean? Okay.
Yes, I think that we can talk about the lean data, LEAN, lean smart city, lean urbanism. You don't always need so much data. Sometimes you better use the mixed method and have better insights. On the other hand, I'll show my screen again. The crisis made us understand the advantages of this decentralized architecture and trust systems that protect our data and make us keep our data ownership, okay? And in this sense, I think that the contact tracing applications did a great service to the service-based economy, because now we should not be catched in the applications. We can we understand that it can be designed in a way that makes us own our data and decide how we share the data with every application. And there are really nice initiatives, international initiatives to work towards this architecture that's really open and enables data sharing. That it's really important to use data sharing, and privacy is important, but privacy in the way that we're talking about privacy in a way that limits our ability to gain insights from data. So a new design of the data is really crucial here.
Yes, I think it's interesting to hear you talk about that. Doesn't a private sector involvement, can't it benefit social needs as well? Because essentially economic gaps or market gaps are formed when the local government or cannot supply the services needed. So the question I think is, should municipalities and local government be focused on providing this care, providing these systems and overall support, or should we bring in innovation? Should we try to integrate the private sector more heavily into this? I know all of you have various degrees of critical views on the subject, and I would love to hear what you think are the biggest problems with doing so. Yes. Also, there are questions from the audience. We will answer them after that.
So just referring to this question, I think that the governments and municipalities know how to use the commodities, okay, information systems that are already designed and ready to use. And the private sector is crucial here in order to build new design and bring the innovation. Tim Berners-Lee is leading a new concept of open architecture. It's called Solid, and he also created a private company to accomplish these ideas, and they collaborate with many startups to do that. So it comes from the private sector. Hopefully, the public sector will adapt it in the right way.
Eran, Hadass, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I think that we have quite a lot of examples in the urban arena to things that private companies can do very well. They're doing an excellent job in connecting between people. So if you want to find a date in Tel Aviv or London, you're probably not going to go to the government application. You're going to open Tinder or something else. And if you want to find a taxi, you might open Uber. And if you want to find, so we do see that private companies create very interesting connections, and they create platforms that allow those kinds of connections. And connections are problematic sometimes, but they create value. They create markets. Personally, I believe that markets are really, really important, and we can imagine a world of like markets of care. Well, I don't know. I hope. Well, it's the first time I'm thinking about those two words together. So I'll just give one example. So my PhD student Tamir is working on applications that allow people to help older adults, mainly in technical support, and it allows it allows to do that inside a family, but also to kind of create markets where people can post problems, and then there's a mobile app that kind of shows them what to do, and it's something that we thought about really during COVID, when both of us had to help our parents with some tech support, and technologies aren't really geared towards that. So that's one example where something like that can happen. At the same time, we do see, for example, when it comes to welfare, that the involvement of private companies in welfare is perhaps inherently problematic, because they have an economic incentive to cut costs, and that's not what we want to do with care. That's something that we do that not to cut costs, and not to we actually want to invest there. So I do think that there's place for markets and private companies that come with them, and startup like your startup, and really creating those markets. And then we also need to think very, very clearly about the role of society and all the government bodies that come with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to continue and just add that, of course, that's what in my presentation, I ended with the question, is it desirable? Do we want private companies to get into this? Because of course, as Eran said, there is a contradiction between trying to make a profit and doing other things. So getting into welfare, but I think that we can think about the private sector more widely. and that also we have like, it's not necessarily the private company that need to profit. We have the third, how do you call it, the non-governmental organizations, but some of them, it's not only, they become more and more like they have business model, and it could be a cooperative model, and it could be a social impact and a social finance, like other models that are not necessarily the startup. So the private sector could lead and engage, and it depends on the question that it asks. And we do want to see more and more private companies, or coming from the private sector, as I said, in different variations of companies that engage in our challenges. We need them, you know, in terms of the climate change and crisis. So we need technology to be there and think about it, but it also need to change. Something need to be different in the business model, maybe, of the companies.
This is the name of the game, the business model. Yes, and I remember now that way before the COVID, I called it PPP, public-private partnerships, as an antivirus. So we can be vaccinated somehow.
Okay, great. I think it's good to know what your opinions about it as really people who have learned about it and experienced this year like the rest of us, but with insights regarding to this particular subject. I think it's very insightful to people to hear you say that. And I want to ask you one last question before we move on to the questions from our audience. I want to know from your point of view, from your experience of this weird year, what is the biggest lesson we've learned and how local governments should use big data tools? What are some guidelines we can propose, and what should we avoid at all costs? Anyone can answer.
Okay, I'll take that. So I think that we did learn that people's involvement, people's trust, people's cooperation is really crucial. We haven't seen very successful solutions that are just based on monitoring people, except maybe in China. But honestly, you know, it worked in China and other countries because they were very, very cooperative, the population. So I really wish that, you know, many of those panels would focus on well, first of all, you know, I found Hadass's phrasing as care as extremely informative and extremely useful, and not just positive, because it helps you to think about those things. So they can focus on care, they can focus on creating collaboration, persuading people, negotiating with people, rather than focus on data, because data is, you know, it's fun, but my work as a researcher is based on collecting data. But at the end, if you want to change something in the world, if you want to create markets, then you need access, collaboration, and those kinds of things. So my kind of first takeaway is trying not to think about it as data, but as data is actually a form of collaboration. And if you want to really have a deep connection with users, deep connection with the world, deep markets, then you need this kind of collaboration, and data is just a small part of it.
I think I would add that the other side of data one side gets the data, but the other side is the question of value. So the question of what is the real value, and is it for the other side? It's the more important thing. Or
And what is your main takeaway, Adas?
No, I don't have anything to say because I'm not dealing with big data. I don't have something.
I mean, from this year.
I think what I said about what municipalities should take and learn from it. So I said it in my presentation, and
Okay.
yeah, I'm standing with that claim that we need to promote more smart social urbanism, not just smart cities. Yeah.
I've been starting answering online. I think that my main takeaway is the impact of the contact tracing applications and understanding that self-reporting is really important, and crowdsourcing and citizen science should be much more in focus. It should also help us understand the digital literacy and privacy literacy, which is not studied enough. It's really important to understand what does it mean when we talk about privacy. I think that many times users were so-called indifferent and didn't resist the surveillance, but that it wasn't because they didn't care about their privacy. They were concerned about their privacy. From our studies, we see that, and it's just that they know that they don't know what's going on, and that's why they just like don't care about it anymore. And that's really important also for civic mindedness. So I think that data is important, data ownership by the users is important, and to make that we need to go to emphasize education and training also in about smart cities. And when we're talking about smart cities, this is a question to begin with: is what is it? Smart cities. It shouldn't be only, as Adas said, lighting and waste management. It should be also the behavioral and social aspects, and the data literacy and the digital literacy of the citizens and immigrants, not only the citizens.
Okay, thank you for this very interesting conversation. I see you've already begun to answer some of the questions. I want to still address the question by Tom. What he asks, what will Pfizer and other companies do with the data they received or gathered on vaccinated people, and how this data could help fight the next pandemic? Ron, I think it's more in your wheelhouse.
I'll take that. I was involved a little bit in kind of a public response to Pfizer's contract with the Israeli government. I must say that I think it's that companies like Pfizer have a very valid reason to collect this data, and at least in the case of Israel, they got data which is publicly available. We see now that vaccines are a complicated issue involving trust and understanding, for example, how well they perform, and side effects and risks that related to different populations is extremely important. And in this case, I think there's a really good reason to create very detailed information systems that collect data about the vaccination processes. Actually, I think that the data that we collect right now is extremely shallow there's a project in Tel Aviv University where information about vaccinating side effects is collected using smart watches and other types of data collection, and we actually learn. It's on my project. It's a project by the faculty, but they learn that there are side effects that are not tracked and collected using the regular information collection processes, it does seem that one of the technologies that we got in this COVID crisis is the fast and safe manufacturing of vaccines. So definitely data is part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ron, for that answer. Ronit, I say you've answered in chat, but do you want to add some more onto it?
I think that we had a special issue about smart cities, smart, sustainable, and fair cities, and the link to the special issue is on the chat. And I think that one of the things that I really learned again and again during this process is that we're not dealing. I think that we should face an ecosystem, not municipalities or governments, but an ecosystem of all these partners. And this is also the truth for people that are interested only in the profit. Okay, we are all interested in the social and environmental values, but also for the financial goals. The municipalities are not very the ideal client. Okay. They're not the ideal customer for you. Maybe other startups, other companies in the industry are much better competitors and collaborators and partners for your business. So I think that emphasizing the ecosystem is important here in all terms, the business models and the data models.
Thank you. We have another question here. What is the importance of the urban environment in a time when everything is going digital? I think it's a very important question with a lot of different aspects. So time-wise, we'd like to keep it short.
Yes, we have 4 minutes left. I think that it's really related to the first question about the emotional effects. I think it's related because we're physiological creatures. We need the sensation of being out and feeling nature, and it also helps us act more responsibly, environmentally responsible. So it's very important also for your soul to keep nature somehow rather than the urbanization of nature.
I would like to add something to Dana, to the 2 questions that are left. I hope Dana is still here. First of all, we are not living in a computer game. So we live in the physical world, and we don't need to think about the physical and the virtual as 2 things that are unattached. As Eran also showed in his presentation, I think that we live in the physical, it just become another layer. We communicate, we transport, we work, in the physical world, we consume, but we're using more and more apps that are another layer in how we transport or how we just interact in the physical world. And as I said in my lecture, I think that although many things became digital and also work and studying, still it made people feel that we need the real connections in real meetings. But I do see now that a study that we were back from the corona and students can come to the university and they choose not to. So, and I believe it's something that we will see in many, many places. And it's a question for us. Do we want to let this digitization process make us give up the real world and real connections in real life? Because we need still to understand it has a lot of emotional effects, being isolated and being all the time in Zoom and screen-based relationship. So it also depends on us to fight against our comfortability and go out to the real world and still have real community life relations.
Thank you, everybody. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. We've really enjoyed having you here. I can attest, by the way, to the Zoom fatigue myself as a student. I think we've talked really about what makes urban communities flourish and what can prevent that. We talked a little bit about how we want to see future endeavors carried out in this field. And I think we all learned something today. So I want to thank our guests from Tel Aviv University who have joined us. I want to thank Dr. Eran Toch. I want to thank Hadass Tzur, and I want to thank Dr. Ronit Porian for this lovely discussion. This webinar will be put on YouTube and other social media. We'll share it. And thank you, of course, to everyone who joined us and asked questions and participated. We'd love to have you here. And thank you to London Festival of Architecture for giving us this platform. There it is. Have a nice day, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Bye.